Hello my Lynn Things family and friends. Welcome on back to the channel, guys. You know what time it is. It's Saturday and it is story time with Lynn, where we're going to be picking up on our next chapter of the beautiful Cicely Tyson story, As I Am. Guys, I am so loving that I went on ahead and did my background over. Y'all, I'm so in love with it. Look at that. Let me turn it up. I feel like my volume is a little low. But yes, guys, so your girl went on ahead and did her background over. I really love it. So like I said, welcome in subbies. Welcome into all my new subbies. This is another thing that I do here on my channel, which is story time with Lynn. It is something new. Of course, if you're coming over to this channel, more than likely it's because of a Dollar Tree haul or a Dollar Tree review, maybe some Ray Dunn, or even a DIY. I wanted to record myself doing this over, but it didn't pan out the way I wanted it to, guys. So I did post like the picture of the before, and this is the after of it, guys. I really love it. I don't know if I'm going to add any more to the wall, but I'm okay with it for right now. So we're going to jump into the book, guys. We are on chapter 16. Wow, guys. This has been such an amazing time reading this. It's just so much going on in her life that, you know, it's just, it does give you pause. It does make you think, you know, of some things that maybe you went through in your life, or you may have relatives who have went through some of these things, and it just brings back so many memories, but it also inspires you, gives you strength and courage and inspiration. So, like I said, we are on chapter 16, and the heading for that is endings and beginnings. So we're gonna, before we do that, y'all know we got to set our ambiance, right? So every week I light a candle. This is a cypress mint candle. I have burned it before. I absolutely love it. And though that it's mint, it's actually quite light. So I did find this candle at Aldi's, guys. They had a lot of these single wick candles for 69 cents. So that's even a better deal than Dollar Tree at 69 cents. So I bought a couple. I think the other one is like a cinnamon. So we're going to light our candle so that we can set the ambiance, and we'll get to reading our next chapter. Okie dokie, guys, we're all lit and we're going to get started. And remember, whether you're playing me in the background as you're doing housework, or you're working on a project of your own, or you're at work and you just, you know, you're on a break and you want to listen to this, however you enjoy this story time, please feel free. And here we go, guys. Endings and beginnings. I had two particular dreams in the fall of 1974 after Jane Pittman's January release. Dance Theater of Harlem was due to perform for Queen Elizabeth. So I took the red eye from LA to New York with plans to eventually fly on to London with Arthur. It was during my red eye flight that the first dream came about. I was in Harlem, standing on a sidewalk across from Sydenham Hospital on 124th, near my godmother's apartment. I looked up, spotted her on her balcony, alongside a young woman with fair skin who looked exactly like Miles's first wife, Frances. When I awakened, I thought, what is Frances doing in my dream? I wonder if Miles is okay. That afternoon, I got in a cab and went on over to Cos Dulan Salon to check in with Frenchie, who knew Miles well. How is Miles? I asked him. Oh, that bad boy. He all right, he said, laughing. I saw him yesterday, and he's acting up as usual. So I knew my dream wasn't about Miles, but I felt tortured by the thought that someone was trying to get a message to me. In no way was I traveling across an ocean until I found out what it was. Do you know anybody who tells fortunes? I asked my then assistant, Susan Sim. She didn't. So I called Lorenzo James, Arthur's friend, who gave me the number for a retired palm reader. We made an appointment for her to come and see me at the Sherry Netherland Hotel, which is where I was staying while doing some press work for Jane Pittman. But before this woman and I could get together, the future revealed itself. Shortly after I booked the reading, I began having strange flashes. I'd be burning up one minute and cold as January the next. When the third heat wave hit, I leaped up from my bed, went into the bathroom, and closed the door. I gazed in the mirror, studying my face for every angle. Am I gonna die? I thought. Between that dream and the dream, it was the only explanation that I could come up with. That same evening, once I could settle myself down for sleep, I had a second dream. This one more disturbing than the first. In that vision, I was all dressed up, walking down a city street, when I suddenly stumbled to the ground. As I fell, I extended my left arm toward heaven, as if I were reaching out for God's help. I had absolutely no idea what to make of either dream. A few days later, I had just emerged from a clothing store on the Upper West Side when I spotted two guys staring at me. The first one, a tall man wearing spectacles, was leaned up against the hood of a Chevy, reading a newspaper that had my photograph on its front page. He looked at the picture, then he looked at me. The other man, short and burly, stood next to him with his arms folded. My instincts told me to flee, so I ducked into Zabar's near Broadway and 80th and waited there for 30 minutes, hoping that they would leave. I stepped out and scanned the block, and I didn't see him, so I quickly hailed a cab to take me back to my hotel at 59th Street. I went up to my room, relaxed for a while, and came down that evening to go out walking. When I entered the lobby, I nearly screamed when I saw the tall man. I dashed into the hotel's pharmacy, right off the lobby, and approached the clerk. Can you please call security? I leaned over the counter and whispered to her, a man is following me. Just then, the guy wandered into the store and began browsing the shelves. I nodded in his direction to let the clerk know that was him. A security officer soon arrived, questioned the man, and escorted him out of the hotel. That evening, I called my mother, who in those years was living near Emily in Mount Vernon. I told her about both dreams, as well as about the men who seemed to be stalking me. You better be careful, she said. Last night I saw you in a dream, and you were dressed in white. In West Indian culture, white is worn for both weddings and funerals, so the color can be associated with death. When my mother told me that she'd seen me in white, a wave of fear surged through me. It's not me you saw in your dream, I thought. It's you. 1 week later, I was packing my formal wear before the London trip when the phone rang. It was my sister. How are you? I asked. Not well, Emily said, her voice trembling. Mother just passed. The phone slipped from my hand as the room went blurry. That is the last thing I remember before my world went dark. My mother a year earlier had given another sign that her earthly days were numbered. I was out in California when she had called me up from her place in Mount Vernon one afternoon. Come here, I want to talk to you, she said, as if I was around the corner. Now mind you, Emily lived across the street, but it was me that she sent for. When I arrived the next week, we sat in her bedroom in front of her television for the longest time, with Mom catching me up on the latest plots and twists in Guiding Light. As I sat there thinking, is this why you called me here? From the other side of the country? As if she'd read my mind, she got up, walked over to a small safe that she kept in the corner of her room. She opened it and began pulling out her important records. Everything from insurance policies to war bonds to Christmas funds, one document at a time. She laid them out across the bed as I looked on. Now, this is for Melrose, she began, and this here is for Emily. On it went, with her parceling out the few pennies that she had squirreled away over the years, wanting to ensure that those she loved most were taken care of. I don't know what you're doing this for, I said to her. You ain't going no place. She knew different. For me, my mother left not a teaspoon. Given my success in the film business, she knew I could financially provide for myself. She also knew I could be trusted to carry out her last wishes, just as a stranger in the Bronx had once predicted. Take care of that child, said the woman, an angel who'd appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly on that day in 1925. She has a sixth sense. She's going to make you very proud one day, and she's going to take care of you in your old age. By 1973, the year my mother called me across the country to see her, both prophecies had come true. She put her earthly possessions not in the hands of her eldest, her heartstring, Melrose, nor did my mother entrust her belongings to her second daughter, her mirror. I am so proud of Emily, my mother had often said over the years. She did everything exactly like me. She even had 3 children like I did, 1 boy and 2 girls. Yet in her final days, my mother had placed her faith in me, a mirror of a different sort, the daughter who at times had reflected her untended hurts. Those shadowy corners of her soul she cringed when staring upon. As God would have it, the child who did the opposite of everything my mother ordered, the one whose out of wedlock shame shined a light on her great unspoken one, that daughter turned out to be the child she relied on. I received that trust in the way I believe she intended it, as a final declaration of her forgiveness and love. That she left me nothing mattered not at all to me. Her pardon, alongside her final approval, was treasure enough. By the time we lost my mother in November of 1974, my father had already gone home. He had passed years earlier in the summer of 1961, the year that I landed the role in The Blacks. Around that time, doctors had discovered that my dad had lymphoma, a blood cancer. By then, he'd remarried, much to my mother's aggravation, because despite the heartache Willie Tyson had brought her, she'd never stopped believing he was her soulmate. In the months earlier, before his death, Daddy was in and out of the hospital, and much of the time we didn't even know he was there. On his hospital entry forms, he never listed his children, which I still find kind of curious. Perhaps scrawling our names was a painful reminder of the day our family had splintered into 2. Or maybe he was just trying to avoid any conflict that may have arisen if Mother had shown up at the hospital alongside us to visit him. He was well acquainted with the potential thunderstorm lurking behind Frederica's placid exterior. Dosha, the quiet church girl from Nevis, was peace like a river. That fiery Frederica, however, had once stoned the other woman in front of a church house. A cross glance from my father's new wife might have been enough to unleash such fury, and Daddy knew that. The next day, I returned to see my father. I took the elevator up to his room, and when the doors had parted, there he sat in a wheelchair, with the nurse ready to transfer him to another floor for x-rays. His cheekbones lifted when he glimpsed me, and I held open the door as the nurse wheeled him on in. The elevator was somewhat crowded, so a few people scooted up to the outer edges to make space for him. Once the doors closed, he peered around and he smiled. "This is my daughter," he announced to those around with pride in his eyes. "This is my eldest girl, come to see me." He may not have written my name on his intake form, but he clearly wanted the world to know I was his. He got his x-rays, and during our visit alone, we chatted about this and that, carefully sidestepping, per the Tyson code of silence, what we both knew was imminent. When I kissed him goodbye that afternoon, I sensed I might never see him alive again. I did not. 2 weeks later, I was hanging out at the Orchard in a bar then near 8th Street and 2nd Avenue, where a lot of us actors congregated after our shows. A Russian couple owned the spot. Over the loudspeaker every evening, they played Russian national anthem as the waitstaff hummed along. On this evening, some old friends, including Sidney Bernstein, one of the producers of The Blacks, were with me, and I had just auditioned for a small role in a production that day. The play was to be directed by my longtime friend and mentor, Vanette Carroll. Our waiter approached the table. "You have a phone call, Miss Tyson," he said. I made my way to the phone and took the receiver, and it was Vanette. "Have you talked to your family?" she said. That is all I heard before I passed out. The next thing I knew, I woke up in Sidney Bernstein's living room. He and his wife were standing over me. "What happened?" I muttered. He told me that my spirit had sensed upon hearing Vanette's question that my father had passed. Like my mother, my father knew he was near the end. I later learned that days earlier he'd called the family to his bedside. I still have a hard time understanding what happened next. My mother and sister, along with Vanette, had decided that because of my audition, it was best not to tell me that my father was in his last days. They did not want me to pull my focus away from my preparation. I'll tell you, boy, there are some things you can never quite pardon others for. This, for me, is one such occurrence. That my family would think that it is more important for me to prep for an audition than to be at my father's bedside. It still puzzles me and deeply pains me. On the day Emily called to tell me of our mother was gone, I fainted momentarily. Once I lifted myself from the floor and picked up the phone again, Emily, through tears, explained how my mother had passed. She had been dressed in her Sunday best on her way to an appointment in the city. As a precaution while walking the streets of New York, she, like the old-time West Indian woman that she was, always attached her pocketbook to a safety pin and then pinned it inside of her coat. She then carried a decoy pocketbook, an empty one, so that if someone snatched it, the thief would find nothing in it. That's how smart she was. While strolling along the sidewalk, likely scoping out her surroundings, my mother suffered a major stroke. A complete couple of passerbys spotted her and rushed to her side and tried to revive her. But she was already gone. She laid there, sprawled on the pavement, with her left hand stretched towards heaven, in exactly the position I had dreamed. The woman in my second dream had been her. My mother did not want to be buried in pink. I don't know why, but she disliked that color. For her funeral, she had set aside the silk beige gown she had worn to my sister's wedding decades earlier. Upon inspecting it, I noticed its frayed edges and stains and decided it was not good enough for my mother's journey through the pearly gates. So I went and bought her a gown that would be best complement her figure, and it happened to be a rose color. I sometimes imagine my mother up in heaven sitting alongside her own mother recounting scenes from Guiding Light while fussing, in a deep West Indian accent, about that pink gown and the rebellious last word of her eldest daughter. After my mother's passing, my brother and I were cleaning out her apartment, a sorrowful duty that each time I breathed Mom's scent on a piece of her clothing, it felt like losing her all over again. We took apart her queen bed frame, and beneath I spotted a stationery box. When I pried it open, a slew of envelopes had fell out. Letters that I had sent to her over the years. Inside them was a stash of money, totaling several $1,000s. Along with my letters, I'd always included checks, which she'd cashed but never spent. Instead, she had tucked the money in the envelopes, perhaps forgetting the stockpile was even there. I used the money to send my daughter Joan, then in her early 30s, on her first trip around the world. "This is your grandmother's gift to you," I said. As I pressed an envelope containing a check into her palm, she whispered, "Thank you." I may never know what my first dream meant, or why the fair-skinned woman resembling Frances had appeared. God's ways are indeed a mystery to us mortals, and as the scriptures have proclaimed, we see dimly in this life what we shall one day know in full. And yet my second dream, as well as my mother's own vision, seemed undeniable in their message. The woman my mother had envisioned in white had not been me, but her. My instincts had rightly told me that. My mother, in her own way, had foreseen her own passing. As clearly as she'd once known the shards of glass would slice open my forearm. The scar that still runs alongside my right wrist reminds me of her persistence. The pain rippling through me in these times now reminds me of losing her. You can never predict how you will feel when your parents pass away. You think you know, but you do not. You may believe you'll be too stunned to speak, and perhaps at moments the grief will indeed render you voiceless. But your silence may also be punctuated with bouts of wailing, of cowering beneath your covers for days, trying to suspend the bleeding, trying to find the ground beneath you again. You may believe that if you have been estranged from or in conflict with your mother or father, you will experience a strange relief upon their passing. None of this or all of this may come to pass. The truth is that, like a great many crises in this life, you cannot truly know what you will and how you will respond until you are standing there in it. There is no preparing for it. Losing my father and mother felt to me like walking through the world without arms. Your skin is freshly bruised and exposed. The pain is raw. Through death, you realize that the word heartache is not metaphorical, but literal. Every part of you throbs and burns. After the rice and peas and plantains have been brought over by the caring neighbors, and once the mourners are long gone, you are left only with the silence, the knowing, the realization that you are on your own. Others you hold dear surround you, of course, but when the people who gave you life have departed this earth, you enter a strange new corridor of detachment. You are untethered, disconnected from the two storylines that gave birth to you. As much as I adored my father and ached after his passing, I felt the loss of my mother most profoundly. Once our family split apart when I was 9, my mother became the ever-present force in my childhood, the one who wrote most prolifically upon the canvas of who I am. When you bury a parent, you lower his or her casket into the ground, but the history between you lives on. The funeral is an ending, yes, but it's also a beginning, the start of a true reckoning with those hurts between you that must be laid to rest. When we buried my mother, I mourned her, and then in the years that followed, as I grieved, I thought I'd long since come to terms with my father, with how he'd both delighted and failed me, with the ways in which he'd unknowingly bruised me just as all parents do, despite their best intentions. But once Miles stumbled back into my world, I learned just how much of a father wound I was still nursing. And that, you guys, is the end of chapter 16. Quite sad, just hearing about the loss of her parents. I personally know that hurt because I have lost both parents many years ago, before I even had children. So I definitely know what that feels like, not to have your biological parents here with you. I am so blessed, though, that every day that God gives me the strength. So thank you so much, guys. Remember, give me your commentary down in the comment section. I definitely love reading all your comments. I love to reply to them. If you like this, please hit that like. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. I would so love to have you here in the Lynn and Things family. Until our next video, guys.